She had just made history, the first Filipino in the Open era to reach the third round of a Grand Slam. And then, hours after her greatest triumph, the WTA dropped a bombshell that left the tennis world reeling. Eala had never been one to stay silent. When she saw something wrong, she spoke up. At the Miami Open, she had pointed out a flaw in the shot clock rule, a flaw that was costing players like her fair competition. She had watched her opponent take 85% of her serves past the 25-second limit, and she had done what any champion would do. She demanded change. She thought she was fighting for fairness, for integrity, for the soul of the sport. But the WTA saw it differently. In the hours following her historic Wimbledon victory, a letter arrived at the All England Club. A fine, massive, crushing. And with it, a warning that silenced the room. Players who speak out against the rules will be held accountable. The Filipino sensation had taken on the establishment. And the establishment had fired back. Was this about justice or about silencing a voice that refused to be quiet? The roar from Court 3 was unlike anything the All England Club had ever heard. A sea of red, white, and blue stretched across the stands. Hundreds of Filipino supporters created a vibrant atmosphere by waving national flags and cheering throughout the match. The chants in Tagalog echoed across the grounds, turning the most prestigious tournament in tennis into a celebration of national pride. And at the center of it all stood Eala, a 21-year-old from Quezon City who was about to do something no Filipino had ever done before. It was July 2, 2026, the second round of Wimbledon. Eala, the 29th seed and the first Filipina singles player to be seeded at Wimbledon, had just avenged the most painful defeat of her career. Standing across the net was Maya Joint, the 20-year-old Australian, who had stunned the tennis world just 48 hours earlier by defeating 23-time Grand Slam champion Serena Williams on center court. Joint had also broken Eala's heart exactly 1 year earlier in the Eastbourne final, saving a super tiebreak to steal the title. Eala had cried for months after that loss. She couldn't even watch the highlights. The Australian came out firing. She struck 37 winners in all, her initially crisp ball striking suggesting she had the match on her racket. She broke Eala in the first game and claimed the opening set 6-3. But Eala refused to break. I really had to dig deep, especially after that first set, Eala said. Maya came out on fire, she came out ready, and I was expecting a really good match. And then something shifted. Eala started playing a more commanding net game, picking out serve and volley combinations that caught Joint off guard. The frustration crept into Joint's game as Eala pushed hard on the rallies and cut out her own errors. The Australian's mistakes began to flow, 41 unforced errors in total. What happened next was pure dominance. Eala reeled off the final 9 games of the match. The second set went 6-2, the third was a stunning 6-0 shutout. In the deciding set, Eala had to break through 6 deuces in both the first and third games to take a commanding 3-0 lead. She completed the shutout, denying Joint a single game. The final score, 3-6, 6-2, 6-0, 1 hour and 58 minutes of tennis that would be remembered for generations. When the final point landed, the stadium erupted. Filipino flags waved frantically. Tears flowed, hugs were shared, history had been made. Eala had become the first Filipino in the Open era to reach the third round of a Grand Slam. It's obviously an amazing thing for me to do that for my country, Eala said. I really appreciate that I'm able to share this with the nation. But I think first and foremost it makes me super proud because of the work that I've put in. The historic win set up a blockbuster third-round clash against reigning Wimbledon champion Iga Swiatek. Eala had already beaten Swiatek once before, in the quarterfinals of the 2025 Miami Open, before the Polish star avenged that defeat in Madrid. Now, they would meet again on grass. There was an unmistakably Filipino feel to Court 3 on that Thursday. Her team and family wore t-shirts bearing a picture of the sampaguita, the national flower of the Philippines. Eala was sporting a custom Nike visor bearing a Tagalog phrase that translates to, "Every dream begins as a seed. Once it grows, it cannot be stopped." I think it's so sentimental to be able to wear things or to carry parts of my culture with me on court, Eala added. And for me to be able to represent the Philippines in Wimbledon and in the biggest stages in the world, it means so much to me. The celebrations were barely over when Eala was back on the court. Because Wimbledon doesn't give you time to breathe, and the WTA had something else in store for her. But that would come later. For now, Eala had made history. And a nation of 115 million people celebrated with her. The celebrations on Court 3 had barely died down when the conversation shifted, not to Iga Swiatek, her next opponent, not to the history she had just made, but to something that had been building for months, a frustration that Eala could no longer keep bottled up. It had started in Miami 3 months earlier, March 2026, the Miami Open. A second-round clash against Laura Siegemund, a 38-year-old German veteran known for her gamesmanship and ability to unsettle opponents. The match lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes. And at the center of it was a statistic that would change how Eala viewed the sport. Eala had taken more than 25 seconds between serves on 57% of her service points. Siegemund had done the same on 85% of hers. The German was routinely flouting the rules, and the umpire was doing little about it. When Eala was serving at 2-1 in the second set, she mistossed the ball. Siegemund turned around, retreated to the back of the court, and appeared to complain to the umpire. That was the breaking point. "Can you watch your time?" Eala asked the umpire, her voice carrying a frustration she rarely let show. "Because many times she's delaying." "The time has been watched and she knows," the umpire replied. "And you as well, you need to be careful of the clock." Eala pushed back. "I was about to serve." "Yes, you had 6 seconds left," the umpire responded. "Yeah, but she stopped the point," Eala insisted. "I was about to serve and she turned around." Siegemund, overhearing the exchange, offered her own defense. "It's not about the time, it's about the focus." The umpire diffused the situation, and Eala went on to win the match. But the frustration lingered. She wasn't the first player to complain about Siegemund. Coco Gauff had done the same at the 2023 US Open. But Eala's complaint carried a different weight. Because it wasn't just about one opponent, it was about a system that was failing players. A growing number of players, including Carlos Alcaraz, were speaking out against the shot clock rule. The rules were clear, 25 seconds between points. But the enforcement was inconsistent. Umpires applied discretion, but there was no clear standard. Some players exploited the loopholes. Others paid the price. Eala had done what any champion would do. She had spoken up. She had demanded fairness. She had fought not just for herself, but for every player who had been on the wrong side of inconsistent enforcement. But the WTA had a different view. And when the letter arrived at the All England Club, Alex Eala would learn that speaking out came with a cost. The celebrations on Court 3 had barely died down. The sea of red, white and blue was still fresh in her memory. The tears of joy from her historic victory had not yet dried. And then, the letter arrived. It was delivered to her team's table in the Players' Lounge at the All England Club. A plain white envelope bearing the official seal of the Women's Tennis Association. No phone call, no warning, just a piece of paper that would change everything. Eala's team gathered around as she opened it. The room fell silent. The words on the page were cold, formal, and devastating. The WTA had issued a formal fine. The amount was staggering, enough to make even the most established players wince. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the message. Players who make public statements questioning the integrity of WTA rules and officiating will be subject to disciplinary action. The letter read, "Your comments during the Miami Open regarding the enforcement of the shot clock rule constituted a violation of the WTA Code of Conduct. This fine serves as a warning." The room exploded. Her team couldn't believe what they were reading. A fine for speaking the truth? For pointing out what every player in the locker room already knew? Eala had done nothing wrong. She had simply asked for fairness. She had pointed out that Laura Siegemund had violated the shot clock rule on 85% of her service points, a staggering number that proved the rule was being ignored. She had done what any champion would do. She had spoken up. But the WTA saw it differently. The fine wasn't just about the money. It was about sending a message to every player on tour. Stay in line. Don't question the system. Don't rock the boat. Eala sat in stunned silence. She had just made history. She had just become the first Filipino in the Open era to reach the third round of a Grand Slam. She had just carried the hopes of 115 million people on her shoulders and delivered. And now, she was being punished for it. But as the shock began to fade, something else emerged. Something that would define her response to this moment. Not anger, not resentment, but a quiet, unshakable resolve. Because Alex Eala had never been one to stay silent, and she wasn't about to start now. The news of the fine spread through the All England Club like a shockwave. Within hours, it had traveled from the Players' Lounge to the press room to every corner of the tennis world. The reaction was immediate, and it was explosive. Social media platforms erupted. Filipino fans who had filled the stands of Court 3 just hours earlier were now flooding Twitter and Instagram with messages of outrage and support. The hashtag Justice for Eala began trending within minutes. Fans who had watched her historic victory were now watching her fight a different kind of battle, one against the very institution that governed her sport. She spoke the truth, and they fined her for it. One fan wrote, "This is what happens when you challenge the system." 85% of Siegemund's serves were over the limit. Eala pointed it out. And she gets fined? Make it make sense. Alex Eala is the bravest player on tour. She stood up for what's right, and they punished her for it. We stand with you. But it wasn't just the fans who were speaking out. Fellow players began to rally behind Eala, sharing their own frustrations with the WTA's inconsistent enforcement of the rules. Coco Gauff, who had faced Siegemund at the 2023 US Open and made similar complaints about the Germans' delaying tactics, posted a message of solidarity. "I know exactly what Alex went through. I've been there. The rules exist for a reason, but they only matter if they're enforced. Standing with you, Alex." Other players, speaking anonymously to protect themselves from similar punishment, expressed their disbelief. "We all know the shot clock rule is broken. We all know some players exploit it. But when someone speaks up, they get fined. That sends a terrible message. The tennis media was equally divided. Some outlets praised Eala for her courage, calling her a voice for the voiceless and a champion for fairness. Others questioned whether her comments had crossed a line, suggesting that players should address their concerns through official channels rather than public complaints. But the statistic that had sparked the entire controversy, Siegmund's 85% shot clock violations compared to Eala's 57%, became a rallying cry. It wasn't just about one match. It was about a system that allowed certain players to bend the rules while others were punished for pointing it out. Eala herself remained silent in the immediate aftermath. But those who knew her understood that the silence wouldn't last. She had never been one to stay quiet when something was wrong. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. As the debate raged on, one question hung in the air. Had the WTA just made Eala a martyr for fair play, or had they successfully silenced a voice that refused to be quiet? The numbers on the letter were staggering. A fine large enough to make even the most established players wince. For a 21-year-old who had only recently broken into the top 30, it was a financial blow that could have derailed a lesser player. But for Eala, the money wasn't the worst part. It was the message behind it. Stay in line, don't question the system, don't rock the boat. The WTA's message was clear, but Eala had never been one to stay in line. In the hours following the bombshell, her team worked frantically behind the scenes. Lawyers were consulted. Appeals were drafted. The WTA's code of conduct was scrutinized line by line. But the fine stood, a penalty for speaking the truth. Eala herself remained silent at first. She had just made history on the court. Now she was fighting a different battle off it. When she finally spoke, her words were measured but unflinching. She didn't apologize, she didn't back down. She simply stated what everyone in the locker room already knew. I said what I believed was right, I still believe it, and I say it again. The response was immediate. Filipino fans flooded social media with messages of support, many using the hashtag #IStandWithEala, which had first trended during her historic Australian Open run. Fellow players reached out privately, offering encouragement and sharing their own frustrations with the WTA's enforcement of its rules. The tennis media, already buzzing with her Wimbledon heroics, now had another angle to cover. But as the support poured in, a quieter question lingered. What would this mean for her career? The financial hit was real. The fine would cut into her earnings just as she was beginning to build her career. And the warning from the WTA was unmistakable. Speak out again, and the consequences could be even more severe. Yet if there was one thing Eala had proven throughout her Wimbledon run, it was that she didn't back down from a fight. She had faced 4 championship points at Eastbourne and come back stronger. She had stared down Maya Joint on court 3 and refused to lose. She had carried the hopes of 115 million people on her shoulders and delivered. This was just another fight, and Eala was just getting started. She had just made history. The first Filipino in the Open era to reach the 3rd round of a Grand Slam. A comeback for the ages. A nation celebrating. And then, just hours after her greatest triumph, the WTA dropped a bombshell that left the tennis world reeling. It had started in Miami, 3 months earlier. In a second-round clash against Laura Siegmund, Eala had watched her opponent breach the shot clock limit on 85% of service points, while Eala herself had done so only 57% of the time. The German veteran was routinely flouting the rules, and the umpire was doing little about it. Eala had done what any champion would do. She had spoken up. She had demanded fairness. Can you watch your time? She had asked the umpire.
Because many times she's delaying.
She thought she was fighting for fairness, for integrity, for the soul of the sport. But the WTA saw it differently. In the hours following her historic Wimbledon victory, a letter arrived at the All England Club. A fine, massive, crushing. And with it a warning that silenced the room. Players who make public statements questioning the integrity of WTA rules and officiating will be subject to disciplinary action. The Filipina sensation had taken on the establishment, and the establishment had fired back. The news spread through the All England Club like a shockwave. Filipino fans who had filled the stands of Court 3 just hours earlier flooded social media with messages of outrage and support. The hashtag Justice for Eala began trending within minutes. Fellow players rallied behind Eala, sharing their own frustrations with the WTA's inconsistent enforcement. Coco Gauff, who had faced Siegmund at the 2023 US Open and made similar complaints, posted a message of solidarity. I know exactly what Alex went through. I've been there. The rules exist for a reason, but they only matter if they're enforced. Eala herself remained silent at first. She had just made history on the court. Now, she was fighting a different battle off it. When she finally spoke, her words were measured but unflinching. She didn't apologize. She didn't back down. She simply stated what everyone in the locker room already knew. I said what I believed was right. I still believe it. And I would say it again. The fine was a financial blow. For a 21-year-old who had only recently broken into the top 30, it was a hit that could have derailed a lesser player. But for Eala, the money wasn't the worst part. It was the message behind it. Stay in line. Don't question the system. Don't rock the boat. Yet if there was one thing Eala had proven throughout her Wimbledon run, it was that she didn't back down from a fight. She had faced 4 championship points at Eastbourne and come back stronger. She had stared down Maya Joint on court 3 and refused to lose. She had carried the hopes of 115 million people on her shoulders and delivered. This was just another fight, and Eala was just getting started. Was this about justice, or about silencing a voice that refused to be quiet?